Stop the car, now." The command cut through the quiet hum of the Mercedes like a blade through silk. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Los Angeles, and Michael Jackson's security team immediately tensed. They'd been driving through the city's grittier neighborhoods after a late recording session, taking what they thought was a safer route back to Michael's hotel. But the King of Pop had just seen something that made him forget about safety protocols, exhaustion, and the mountain of work waiting for him tomorrow. Through the tinted windows, Michael was staring at a figure huddled in a doorway, and what he heard in the next few moments would challenge everything he thought he understood about music, fame, and human connection. It was March 1995, during one of the most difficult periods of Michael Jackson's life. The accusations, the media circus, the constant scrutiny, everything had taken its toll. Michael had been spending more time in the studio lately, working through the night because sleep wouldn't come anyway. The darkness felt safer than daylight, when cameras followed his every move and headlines screamed lies about his character. "Mr. Jackson, we really shouldn't stop here," James Mitchell, his head of security, cautioned from the driver's seat. His eyes scanned the empty street nervously. "This neighborhood isn't safe at this hour." But Michael wasn't listening. He was completely focused on the sound that had caught his attention, a haunting melody being played on what sounded like a beat-up acoustic guitar. The music was raw, imperfect, but filled with something that all of Michael's expensive studio equipment couldn't capture. Absolute, undeniable soul. "That music," Michael whispered, pressing his face closer to the window. "Do you hear it?" Frank DeLeo, Michael's manager who was riding in the passenger seat, sighed deeply. He knew that tone in Michael's voice. It was the same tone that had led to Michael bringing home stray animals, hiring entire families who were struggling, and once stopping a concert because he thought someone in the audience needed help. "Michael, it's probably just another street performer. The city's full of them. We need to get you back to the hotel. You have meetings in 5 hours." "No," Michael said firmly, his hand already on the door handle. "This is different. I need to see who's making that music." Before his security team could protest further, Michael had opened the door and stepped out into the cold Los Angeles night. He pulled his black fedora lower and adjusted his surgical mask, his usual disguise, but he moved with purpose toward the source of the music. The figure in the doorway was barely visible in the shadows between streetlights. As Michael approached, he could make out more details. A man, probably in his 50s, wearing clothes that had seen better days, layers of worn jackets, torn jeans, shoes held together with duct tape. His weathered hands moved across the guitar strings with surprising skill, coaxing out a melody that seemed to contain both heartbreak and hope in equal measure. But it was when Michael got close enough to hear the words the man was singing that he stopped in his tracks, frozen by what he was hearing. The man was singing Human Nature, Michael's song, from the Thriller album. But he was singing it in a way Michael had never heard before, slower, more melancholic, with lyrics slightly changed to reflect a life lived on the streets. Where Michael had sung about the electric night, this man sang about the lonely night. Where Michael had sung about reaching out, this man sang about being passed by. The homeless musician was so absorbed in his performance, eyes closed against the world, that he didn't notice Michael standing just a few feet away, didn't notice the small crowd that had begun to gather, Michael's security team, keeping their distance but watching carefully, didn't notice that the most famous musician in the world was listening to his interpretation of a song that had sold millions of copies. When the last notes faded into the night air, Michael did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He began to clap, slowly, steadily, the sound echoing off the empty buildings. The man's eyes snapped open, revealing a face marked by hard years but eyes that held unexpected intelligence and depth. He looked at Michael with confusion, then recognition flickered across his features, but not the kind of recognition Michael usually saw. This wasn't starstruck excitement. This was something else entirely. "You're him," the man said quietly, not as a question but as a simple statement of fact. Michael pulled down his mask, letting the streetlight reveal his face. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "You changed my song, made it into something new." The man's laugh was bitter but not unkind. "Changed it into the truth, you mean? Your version was about seeing the world from limousines and penthouse suites. Mine's about seeing it from doorways and shelters." Instead of being offended, Michael felt something unexpected, curiosity mixed with respect. This man wasn't trying to flatter him or ask for anything. He was simply being honest in a way that few people dared to be with the King of Pop. "What's your name?" Michael asked, crouching down to be at eye level with the man. "Marcus. Marcus Webb." The man studied Michael's face. "And before you ask, yes, I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are, but I bet nobody knows who I am anymore, and that's probably how it should be." "Why do you say that?" Marcus looked down at his guitar, running his fingers gently over its scarred surface. Because I used to be somebody too. Not like you, obviously. But I had my moment. I was a session musician in the 70s and early 80s. Played with some big names you'd recognize. Had a wife, a house in the valley, a future that looked pretty bright. Michael sat down on the cold concrete, ignoring the alarmed sounds from his security team. Bad choices happened. Marcus's voice was matter of fact, without self-pity. I lost the wife, the house, the gigs. Lost respect from people who used to call me friend. Lost respect for myself. Eventually ended up here, playing the songs other people made famous, because I never had the courage to write my own. There was a long silence. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. A car passed, its occupants staring at the strange scene. A homeless man and someone who looked suspiciously like Michael Jackson sitting together on a doorstep at 3 in the morning. You changed my lyrics, Michael said finally. That takes courage. That takes creativity. Marcus shook his head. That takes desperation. When you're invisible, you can say anything because nobody's really listening anyway. I'm listening, Michael said quietly. And he was. For the next 2 hours, as his security team waited with increasing anxiety and his manager made increasingly frantic calls about rearranging morning schedules, Michael Jackson sat on that cold doorstep and listened to Marcus Webb's story. Marcus talked about his childhood in Detroit, learning guitar from his father who'd played in jazz clubs. He talked about the incredible high of his first big session, playing on a track that had made it to number 3 on the Billboard charts. He talked about the pride in his mother's eyes when she'd heard his work on the radio. Then he talked about the darker chapters, the pills that helped him play through exhaustion, the cocaine that made him feel invincible in the studio, the gradual slide from recreational use to dependency, the day his wife left, taking their daughter, the day he got fired from a session for showing up too high to play, the long descent into homelessness that had somehow felt both sudden and inevitable. But what struck Michael most wasn't the tragedy of Marcus's story, it was the man's perspective on it. Marcus didn't blame bad luck or other people. He took responsibility for his choices while also acknowledging the systemic failures that had made it almost impossible to climb back out once he'd fallen. The thing about being homeless that people don't understand, Marcus said, is that it's not just about not having a home. It's about being invisible. People look right through you. You could be bleeding on the sidewalk and people would step over you to avoid being late for their coffee meeting. Michael nodded slowly. I feel invisible too sometimes. For completely different reasons, I know. But when you're famous, people see what they want to see. They see the moonwalk, the glove, the headlines. They don't see me. Marcus laughed. A real laugh this time. Man, that's the most privileged thing I've ever heard. And also, I get it. Prison bars don't have to be visible to be real. It was at that moment that something clicked in Michael's mind. An idea that would seem crazy to everyone around him, but felt absolutely right in his gut. Marcus, how would you like to help me with something? The homeless musician raised an eyebrow. Unless you need someone to show you the best dumpsters for finding edible food, I'm not sure what help I could be to Michael Jackson. I'm working on a new album, Michael said, his voice growing more animated, and I've been struggling with one track in particular. It's about feeling lost, about being judged by people who don't know you, about the distance between who you are and who the world thinks you are. But everything I write feels manufactured, fake, because I'm writing about pain from inside a mansion. And you think a homeless guy can make it more authentic? Marcus's voice held an edge of challenge. No, Michael said firmly. I think a talented musician who's lived through real struggle and maintained his dignity and his art despite everything, I think that person could help me understand something I've been missing. What happened next in that pre-dawn Los Angeles street would set in motion a chain of events that neither man could have predicted. Michael's security team nearly had heart attacks when their boss insisted on driving Marcus to an all-night diner. Frank DeLeo made calls to lawyers, convinced this was going to end in either a lawsuit or a tabloid disaster. And Marcus himself remained skeptical, certain that this surreal encounter would evaporate with the morning light. But Michael Jackson was serious. Over pancakes and coffee at a 24-hour diner in a neighborhood where no one cared about celebrities, Michael and Marcus talked about music, life, pain, and the strange ways that privilege and poverty could create parallel kinds of isolation. You know what the saddest thing is? Marcus said, syrup dripping from his fork. I can play any song you name. I've got thousands of songs memorized, but I never wrote a single one. I was always too scared, too convinced I didn't have anything worth saying. Everyone has something worth saying, Michael replied. The question is whether the world is willing to listen. As dawn began to break over Los Angeles, Michael made Marcus an offer that would sound insane to anyone else. Come to the studio with me today. Not as some publicity stunt, not as charity, as a collaborator. Help me finish this song. Share your perspective. Let me see if we can create something that's truthful for both of us. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. You're serious? Completely. You know I smell bad. I haven't showered in a week. Your fancy studio people are going to lose their minds. Let them, Michael said with a slight smile, the first genuine smile his security team had seen from him in weeks. Maybe it's time someone shook things up. The session that followed would become legendary in music industry lore, though few people know the true story behind it. Michael's producers and engineers arrived that morning expecting a normal day of work. Instead, they found their boss in the studio with a homeless man, both of them hunched over a guitar, working through chord progressions and lyrics. The initial reactions ranged from confusion to barely concealed horror, but Michael shut down every objection with quiet firmness. Marcus is here to work. Treat him with respect or leave. What emerged over the next 6 hours was something neither man had expected. Marcus's raw, unpolished perspective on struggle and invisibility, combined with Michael's gift for melody and production, created something that transcended both their individual styles. The song they worked on, later titled Through the Glass, became one of the album's most critically acclaimed tracks, though the public never knew the true story of its creation. But more than the song itself, what happened between Michael and Marcus in that studio transformed them both in ways that had nothing to do with music. Marcus, who had spent years convinced he had nothing valuable to contribute, discovered that his experiences hadn't destroyed his creativity, they had deepened it. Working with professional equipment again, being treated as an equal collaborator rather than as an object of pity, awakened something in him that had been dormant for years. And Michael, who had been suffocating under the weight of fame and false accusations, found something he'd been desperately searching for, an authentic connection with someone who had no agenda, who wanted nothing from him except honest collaboration. When the session ended, Michael's team expected him to send Marcus on his way, maybe with some money and a pat on the back. Instead, Michael made arrangements that shocked everyone who knew him, and this was a man known for extravagant gestures. "I want to set something up," Michael told his manager, ignoring the man's growing alarm. "Marcus needs a place to stay, not a shelter, a real apartment, and I want to cover the first year's rent, plus living expenses." "Michael, you can't save every person you meet on the street," Frank protested, "and the media will crucify you if this gets out. They'll say you're using him for publicity." "Then we don't tell the media," Michael said simply. "This isn't about publicity. This is about doing what's right." But there was more. Michael arranged for Marcus to get treatment for his addiction, not at some impersonal clinic, but with a therapist who specialized in helping artists. He arranged for Marcus to have his own home recording set up, encouraging him to finally write those songs he'd been too afraid to create. "You're giving me too much," Marcus protested when he learned the extent of Michael's plans. "I played guitar with you for one day. I don't deserve all this." "It's not about deserving," Michael replied. "It's about recognizing that you have value, even when the world has tried to convince you otherwise. You helped me today, Marcus. You gave me perspective I desperately needed. Let me help you rebuild what you lost." The aftermath of that chance encounter on a Los Angeles street corner rippled outward in ways neither man initially recognized. Marcus moved into a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, began attending therapy sessions, and slowly started rebuilding his life. But the change in him wasn't just about having a roof over his head. It was about rediscovering his identity as an artist. Within 6 months, Marcus had written his first original song. It was rough, raw, but undeniably powerful. A blues-influenced track about losing everything and finding that you still had yourself. He sent a recording to Michael, almost as a joke, not expecting a response. Michael called him the same day. "This is brilliant. Don't change a thing about it. It's real." That encouragement led to more songs. Marcus began performing again, not on street corners, but at small clubs that specialized in authentic blues and folk music. His story, the parts he chose to share, resonated with audiences who were tired of polished, overproduced perfection. Here was someone who'd been to the bottom and climbed back up, singing about it with authority that couldn't be faked. But Marcus wasn't the only one transformed by that night. Michael Jackson, who had been growing increasingly isolated and cynical about human nature, found his faith in humanity restored by the experience. He began venturing out more at night, talking to people his security team would have preferred he avoid, not as publicity stunts, but as genuine attempts to connect with lives vastly different from his own. That night with Marcus changed Michael's entire approach to his art and his life. recalled one of his longtime collaborators in a later interview. He stopped trying to create from a place of perfection and started creating from a place of truth. You can hear it in the music he made after that. It's more vulnerable, more human. The song they'd created together, Through the Glass, was released without any explanation of its origins. The lyrics spoke of two men watching each other from opposite sides of an invisible barrier, one trapped by fame, the other by poverty, both feeling equally isolated from authentic human connection. Music critics praised it as one of Michael's most mature and emotionally honest works, though they couldn't quite identify what made it feel so different from his other songs. Years later, after Michael's death in 2009, Marcus finally told the full story in a small interview with a music magazine. He explained how a chance encounter at 3 a.m. had transformed both their lives, how the king of pop had treated a homeless musician with respect and dignity when he could have simply driven past. "People always want to know about the big gestures," Marcus said in that interview. "The glove, the moonwalk, the concerts, but the Michael I knew was the guy who sat on a dirty doorstep at 3 in the morning and actually listened, who treated me like I mattered when everyone else had convinced me I didn't. That's the Michael Jackson the world should remember." Marcus Webb, the homeless musician Michael met that night, is still alive today. He never became famous, never sold millions of records, but he's still making music, still writing songs, still performing at small venues for audiences who appreciate authenticity over polish. He keeps in his apartment a photograph of himself and Michael from that recording session, the only photograph ever taken of their collaboration. In interviews, Marcus always deflects suggestions that Michael saved him. "Michael didn't save me," he insists. "He reminded me that I was worth saving. That's different. The actual work of rebuilding my life, that was on me. But he gave me the foundation to build on. He showed me that one person seeing your value can change everything." The guitar Marcus was playing that night, the beat-up acoustic that had survived his years on the street, now sits in a place of honor in his apartment. He still plays it, though he can afford better instruments now. "This guitar has more stories than any 10 perfect instruments," he says. "It knows what it's like to make music when you have nothing else. That's a knowledge I never want to forget." Michael's decision to stop his car that night and engage with a homeless musician taught everyone around him a lesson about the arbitrary nature of value. In a world that measures worth by commercial success, Michael chose to see value where society had decided there was none. And in doing so, he revealed something essential about his own character, a persistent belief in human dignity that survived even when his own dignity was under constant attack. "The world loved to paint Michael as weird, as disconnected from reality," said one of his closest friends at his funeral. But the truth was, he was more connected to reality than most of us. He understood that circumstances don't define character. He understood that everyone, no matter how fallen, deserves to be seen as fully human. That night with Marcus was just Michael being Michael, seeing past the surface to the person underneath. The story of Michael Jackson and Marcus Webb isn't just a heartwarming tale of a celebrity helping someone less fortunate. It's a story about two men who found in each other exactly what they needed most. Marcus found someone who saw his value when he'd forgotten it himself, and Michael found someone who treated him as a person rather than as an icon. In a world that increasingly divides people into categories, successful and unsuccessful, worthy and unworthy, visible and invisible, their encounter stands as a reminder that those divisions are artificial. Talent doesn't care about your address. Creativity doesn't disappear just because life knocked you down. And sometimes the most important conversations happen in the most unlikely places between the most unlikely people. "If I could go back and thank Michael for one thing," Marcus reflected years after that fateful night, "it wouldn't be for the apartment or the recording time or any of the material help. It would be for sitting down on that cold concrete and listening, really listening. Not with the intent to fix or save me, but with genuine curiosity about my life and my perspective." In a world where everyone was shouting opinions at him, Michael stopped to listen to a nobody on a street corner. That's the act of grace I'll never forget. Today, when Marcus performs at small clubs around Los Angeles, he always includes human nature in his set, but he doesn't play Michael's version, or even the modified version he was singing that night. He's created his own arrangement, one that honors both the original and his own journey. And when people in the audience recognize it, and someone always does, they sometimes ask if he ever met Michael Jackson. Marcus always smiles at that question. "Once," he says simply, "for one perfect night, the king of pop and a street musician made music together. And for both of us, nothing was ever quite the same after that." The legacy of that encounter extends beyond the two men directly involved. Michael's behavior that night, his insistence on treating Marcus with dignity, his willingness to collaborate as equals, his quiet generosity without publicity, inspired many in his inner circle to rethink their own assumptions about worth and value. Several of Michael's band members and producers, started volunteering at homeless shelters after witnessing what happened with Marcus. His security team, initially horrified by Michael's decision to stop in a dangerous neighborhood, came to understand that their boss saw risks and rewards differently than they did. To Michael, the risk of missing a genuine human connection was greater than any physical danger, and somewhere in the music industry's collective memory lives the knowledge that one of Michael Jackson's best tracks emerged not from a polished, planned writing session, but from a spontaneous encounter with a homeless musician at 3 a.m. It's a reminder that creativity thrives on authentic experience, that the best art comes from truth rather than technique. This beautiful story reminds us that we never know when life will put someone in our path who needs exactly what we can offer, and who might offer us exactly what we need in return. Michael Jackson could have driven past that doorway. He had every reason to: exhaustion, security concerns, a packed schedule, but he stopped. He listened. He engaged. And 2 lives were permanently altered by that choice. How often do we drive past our own opportunities for connection? How many times do we let fear, prejudice, or simple busyness keep us from seeing the humanity in people society has labeled as other? What would our world look like if more of us had the courage to stop, to listen, to treat every person we encounter as someone with value and dignity, regardless of their circumstances? If this story inspired you to think differently about homelessness, about the arbitrary nature of success and failure, and about the transformative power of treating people with dignity, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more incredible untold stories about music legends revealing their true character in moments when nobody was watching. And remember, sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply stop and listen when the world expects us to keep driving.